Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing a really fascinating deep dive into how ancient texts literally shape the modern, everyday dietary practices of millions of people. We're going to examine a very specific piece of scripture to uncover the textual blueprint that forms the absolute foundation of Jewish food laws. So, let's jump right in. Okay, let's dive into this. We see specific dietary rules everywhere today, right? From the aisles of your local grocery store to the menus at your favorite restaurants. But where exactly do Jewish dietary practices actually originate? They certainly aren't just some random cultural evolution. To really understand them, we have to trace them back to their absolute roots and find the core original manual that set these rules in stone thousands of years ago. And to answer that, we have to look squarely at what our course materials define as the sources of authority within Judaism. Now, think about it. In any legal or religious system, an authority is your ultimate reference point, right? It's the text that settles the debate. It sets the standard. Daily life and religious devotion are deeply, deeply anchored in these specific, authoritative texts. So if we want to understand the food on the table, we absolutely have to look at the words on the ancient scroll first. Section 1. Decoding Leviticus 11. Let's take a look at our primary source text and do a little investigating. So here are the exact words pulled straight from Leviticus 11, verses 1 through 23. It says, "Among mammals, you may eat any one that has true hooves that are cloven and that brings up its cud. You may eat any creature that lives in the water, whether in seas or rivers, as long as it has fins and scales." Now, look at how incredibly specific that is. The text isn't just offering some vague, generic suggestion about healthy eating. No, it provides a highly detailed biological set of criteria. It points to very specific physical traits as the ultimate source of authority for what's permitted. Section 2. Mammals and sea creatures. Now, what's really interesting about this next slide is how the text categorizes the rules. Let's break down these visual rules, because you really have to notice the strict binary nature of the instructions here. Permitted mammals, they must have a cloven hoof, meaning the hoof is split, and they must chew the cud. This is absolutely not an or situation, folks. If a mammal only has one of these traits, doesn't pass the test. And the exact same logic applies to the water. Permitted fish must have fins and scales. Both of these specific criteria have to be met, absolutely without exception. It's a binary system that creates total clarity. You observe the physical traits, check them against the criteria, and boom, you immediately know if it's permitted by the source of authority. Let's move to and see how this builds, because it gets even more fascinating. While Leviticus gives us these highly specific physical checklists for animals, our source materials remind us of an even older, broader, foundational rule. And it actually points back to Genesis. Genesis lays the very first groundwork for what human beings are permitted to consume, right at the start of creation. So Genesis establishes the big, overarching foundation of permission, and then Leviticus steps in later to provide the precise, detailed boundaries for the animal kingdom that we literally just decoded. It's like a giant puzzle, forming a brilliantly interconnected system of authority. Section 3. The language of law. Because to talk about this today, we need the specific vocabulary given to us by these ancient source texts. Okay, so our first essential term is kosher. You've probably heard this one, right? This is the direct practical application of the permitted animals we just decoded from Leviticus. When a mammal actually has those cloven hooves and chews its cud, or when a fish has both fins and scales, it fits the criteria to be officially designated as kosher. Simply put, kosher is just the term for foods explicitly permitted by the authoritative text. It's essentially the label of approval based strictly on the scripture. But as you know, every legal system has a boundary, and that brings us to our next key term, treifa. If kosher represents the foods that successfully meet the strict criteria of Leviticus, treifa represents the complete counterpart in these dietary laws. When an animal fails to meet those dual biological requirements we emphasized earlier, like, say, it lives in the sea, but it completely lacks scales, it falls outside the permitted bounds. And understanding treifa is just as absolutely crucial as understanding kosher. Why? Because knowing what is not permitted is exactly what defines the boundaries of what is. And the whole shebang brings us to the grand umbrella term, kashrut. Kashrut is the broader terminology encapsulating all of these rules we've been talking about. It's the definitive system of dietary laws. When you take the ancient authority of Genesis, combine it with the specific biological checklists of Leviticus, and then apply the practical concepts of kosher and treifa, well, you are engaging in the system of kashrut. This is exactly how raw, written textual scripture translates into a formal, everyday lived practice. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why we are studying this in Component 3. Decoding Leviticus 11 links directly to the concept of kosher and shows us firsthand how Jewish practices are actually formed. It highlights the incredibly structure of religious law, and crucially, it ties right into the concept of mitzvot, the commandments. You see, following these dietary laws isn't merely going on a diet, it's the active fulfillment of a mitzvah, a religious commandment drawn directly from their ultimate source of authority. Section 4. Testing your knowledge. Because really understanding the text means being able to answer direct questions about it. So, the crucial point is if you faced this possible exam question right now, describe the animals that Leviticus states are kosher, how would you answer it? Remember that super important and condition we discussed earlier? You wouldn't just write down cows and fish, right? You would utilize the source of authority. You'd describe that permitted mammals must both have cloven hooves and chew the cud. You would clearly state that creatures of the sea and rivers must possess both fins and scales. Because recalling these exact, specific physical traits, that proves you've actually decoded the text. Finally, consider this big, overarching exam question from the source. Describe Jewish beliefs about kosher food. Answering this requires synthesizing everything we just covered: Genesis, Leviticus, Kashrut, and Mitzvot. How does an ancient textual authority continue to literally dictate daily belief and practice in the modern world? Well, the next time you're at the store and you see a kosher symbol on a food package, I want you to ask yourself, are you just looking at a simple dietary label? Or are you actually looking at a direct, unbroken line to an ancient text?